Welcome to the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast, episode number 149. Hi, I'm Jill. Thank you for joining us.
And I'm Chris. Jill and I are your hosts for this podcast and the founders of the Becoming Ellie community.
In case you're wondering where the name Ellie came from, she was the Norse goddess of aging who beat Thor in a wrestling match. Chris and I thought, we want to be like Ellie.
You can find out more about the Becoming Ellie community and this podcast at our website, becomingellie.com. Ellie is spelled E-L-L-I.
Be sure to sign up for our newsletter while you're there. That way you'll know about new episodes and anything else that's new with us.
Today we're talking with both Emily and Mitch Clionsky about preventing dementia.
Yes, one of the things we learned was that you're never really too young to take preventive measures. Let's go to the podcast. Emily and Mitchell Clionsky are the authors of Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. Their book is the culmination of 45 years of extensive clinical evaluation and treatment.
Emily Clionsky, MD, completed residencies in internal medicine and in psychiatry, and is a diplomat of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology.
Mitchell is a board-certified neuropsychologist who specializes in evaluating and treating patients with cognitive impairment, dementia, ADHD, and traumatic brain injury.
A husband-wife team, they have combined 70 years of professional and clinical experience in medicine and neuropsychology and have treated 20,000 patients. They partner at a private practice, Clionsky Neuro Systems Incorporated, based in Springfield, Massachusetts.
They are experienced public speakers, podcast guests, and workshop presenters for general and professional audiences.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to have both of you together with us today.
Well, thanks for inviting us. It's delightful to be with you.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
We are very happy to have you both here today. Thank you. One reason why we're happy to have you is that it's a safe bet that many of our listeners are concerned about preventing dementia, especially Alzheimer's disease. And why did the two of you decide to write this book?
Well, actually, we came on it almost by accident and happenstance. Mitch had decided to basically get us some continuing medical education credits, which Harvard does yearly by offering a social media continuing medical education program for doctors.
Interesting. Wow.
So it was at our favorite hotel in Boston, the Fairmont Copley. We don't make any money off them, by the way, but that is our favorite hotel. And he said, well, let's go on off for a couple of days and do this. I said, okay. Well, by the time we got there were about another 1,000 doctors from all over the world waiting to hear about how to become social media experts or write a book or write a podcast or become a famous person. Well, what we realized, what we were better off doing was actually talking to the editors or the agents that they had in little conference area. And we figured, well, why don't we try and write a book? Why don't we get one of these people interested in us? So what can we write a book about? And Mitch came up with the idea of...
Well, dementia prevention is something we've been doing clinically. So that's what really is the impetus. I mean, it wasn't just a lark. It was a way of taking things that we've been doing for years and years and years and working with patients with dementia and then applying the principles that we used to help them to stop getting worse, which in dementia is a real problem because it's a progressive illness. So we had already developed interventions. Emily's medical approach to this was to correct all of the potentially correctable medical conditions. You'd be surprised how many people come in with those despite seeing a doctor every 6 months. We looked at things that most doctors didn't look at. We used the kind of testing that I do for memory and attention and problem solving to use as determinants of how people were doing. And we were able to stop people from declining by using this kind of combined psychosocial behavioral medical approach. And then we said, we're also applying this to people with earlier stages, people who had what we call mild cognitive impairment, who are not themselves, but had not declined to a point where it was diagnosed as dementia. And that worked even better because they had more to work with. And then we started looking very strongly at all of the research that had been published over the last 15 years on all of the things that could reverse or stop the decline that people had at the very earliest stages. How can we prevent this? And what we discovered is that it's preventable in 1 out of 2 cases. There's well-established research showing this. So that seemed to be a really great place to use this convention basically as a launching pad for us to be writing a book.
Let's back up just a little bit. Can you define dementia for us? Is Alzheimer's just another word for dementia?
Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. So dementia is a progressive neurological condition. It's a decline. It affects the surface areas of our brain, what we call the cortex. So the size, the shape, how much brain matter we have. It also impacts the connectivity of different areas of the brain under the surface, what's called the subcortical areas. And so this is a medical condition, and it has a variety of medical causes.
Over 400, in fact.
400 causes?
There's over 400 causes of dementia.
But most people really pay attention to the big major ones. Alzheimer's disease, which is one of them. Vascular dementia. Dementias due to Parkinson's disease or Lewy bodies. Dementias due to repeated head injury. Sometimes even just one head injury can be enough to bring on an earlier case of dementia. Dementia is due to things like alcoholism, encephalitis. You get a terrible kind of mosquito bite infection or Lyme disease, you can come down with dementia if you're vulnerable, if you're at that point.
As well as nutritional deficiencies, such as iron deficiency, which most people don't even think about, but is fairly common in women, particularly women who have had children. B12 deficient, and that's best measured by methylmalonic acid. Folic acid deficient, although not as much now as since 1997, since the government now puts folic acid in all of our bread supplies and pasta supplies.
Is dementia inevitable as we age? Is it a genetic predetermined thing, or is it something? Obviously, you're saying we can do things to prevent it.
Yes, we can.
If you have a lot of the genetic components, because you happen to come from a family where like everybody has dementia and gets it very early, like in their 50s, chances are you have a very high likelihood of getting it. Fortunately, that's a very small percentage of the people. For most of the people, it's not very genetically determined. It's only maybe 5% or fewer of the people whose genetics are going to doom them, which is surprising because most people just think they really freak out, and which is one of the reasons we don't have people go and get those blood tests, because it doesn't really help you to do anything. It's just going to cause you to become anxious if you have 2 copies of the APOE4 allele, which is associated with higher risk. That's not going to, so what are you going to do then? Think harder about preventing dementia? Not really. It's just going to make you anxious. So those people, that's a very specific group. For most people, we're looking at in your 60s, about a 10% likely. By the time you get into your mid 70s, that doubles to about 20%. By the time you get into your mid 80s, it's about a 40% likelihood. So no, not everyone gets it, but the older you live, this is one of those things that is age-related for most people, so you run a higher risk. Regardless if you have bad genes, good genes, whatever, we believe, and the evidence shows, that people who identify where they are on target or off target in their health habits and their other, their medications that they're taking, the whole variety of different causes or contributors can make a substantial difference in the likelihood of their getting Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Parkinson's dementias, Lewy body dementias, frontotemporal dementias, you name it, all the different brands of dementia as they age. So we believe in prevention as early as possible, continuing throughout the rest of our lives.
I think it'd be really interesting if Mitch described for you what we see from large epidemiologic studies, which is when we take a look at the American population, at the age of 50, we can begin to see in normal, average people in the United States, not people who are demented, we can begin to see declines in their cognition when compared with people who are younger. And these declines are in memory, executive function, which includes speed of processing, attention, the ability to do multitasking. So there is some degree of cellular senescence, some cellular aging that just happens because we're mammals. It happens to all mammals on the planet. But the reality is we can pay attention to the specific factors that have been identified in our book by leading researchers and by really good empiric studies that can delay that decline and level off that trajectory of cognitive loss as we age. One of the things that's so critical, I think particularly for women, is that what we used to think of as perimenopause, and menopause being around 52, we now have documented in this country that perimenopause is around the age of 42. And with that perimenopausal change and the decrease in estrogen in our bodies, we undergo incredibly vast changes. One of them happens to be the fact that our airway muscles that control how open our airway stays when we are sleeping at night, those airway muscles change. They become more flaccid, more floppy, and so our airways are more prone to closing when we sleep. This causes something known as obstructive sleep apnea. And the most important thing about that is when you don't have air going down your airway at night into your lungs, your brain doesn't get oxygen for periods of time. And so that condition is defined as losing your oxygen to a significant level 5 times or more per hour. It's like somebody putting a pillow over your face, which is pretty scary. You wouldn't want that to happen. But that's actually happening to women, particularly as they enter and then go through the stages of perimenopause and menopause. We become just like men. And it's preventable. We can be screened for that.
I know that on your website, you have an 18-page PDF, a 25-question dementia prevention checklist. And it's available that allows people to get insight on their individual strengths and vulnerabilities. I looked at it and tried to answer some. Some of the questions are easy to answer, but some of them are a little more difficult. But there's a lot of information there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that checklist?
Sure. So the checklist, it sounds larger when you say 18 pages, but that's only because of the way it's presented.
Right.
It's only 25 questions.
Right.
About 18 pages, man.
It does feel a little overwhelming to someone who's not a medical professional. Let's put it that way.
It's 25 questions and a lot of them are pretty simple. Some you might need to go to your doctor and get answers, but go ahead, Mick.
No, but you're going to be able to tell if you're drinking and how much you're drinking.
Yeah, those are pretty easy to answer.
Right. There's a lot of them, and they're like that. And some that people won't even think about because there's something called anticholinergic burden, for example, where people are taking over-the-counter medications, the side effects of which deplete the chemicals in our brain that are important for making memories. Specific chemical is acetylcholine. We all have acetylcholine in our brain. As we get older, it tends to decline a bit just naturally. In people with memory disorders, it declines even more. Problem is that a lot of the things that we are taking and not thinking too much about actually drive down the acetylcholine levels even more. So, for example, you have a cold. Your nose is running. You take an over-the-counter antihistamine to dry you up. Chances are it contains diphenhydramine, Benadryl. It's pretty anticholinergic. Suppose that you're also on a cardiac medication. It may have anticholinergic effects that are additive to the others. Then maybe, like many people in their midlife and older, especially women, they're finding that it's sort of hard to get to the bathroom in time. So they talk to their urologist, who gives them a medication that like Detrol or Ditropan or one of those kind of medications that dry up or actually give them more bladder control. That also is anticholinergic. Then you can't fall asleep at night, so you're taking one of those PM medications that also contain Benadryl. So now you have this huge anticholinergic burden. So one of the things that we have in the checklist is a link to what's called the anticholinergic burden scale. with not our scale, but we got permission from the people who developed it to be able to link to them. So you can put in the names of all the medicines you take and actually calculate how bad your anticholinergic burden is. This is really useful because then you can think, what am I taking I don't really need? So maybe I can work around this. Maybe I can find, and there are some, bladder medications that are not so anticholinergic.
Or maybe what you can do is talk to your gynecologist or your physical therapist about alternative ways of strengthening those bladder support muscles, which are generally compromised when a woman delivers a baby via a vaginal delivery.
So by going through each of these questions, you're going to be determining on the basis of this whether your answers are on target for what we know to be good practice, whether they're off target so that they're really a problem and should be paid attention to, or whether they're near target. So, for example, if your blood pressure is just a little high, you may not need to take major action, but it might be lowered by cutting out some salt or by losing weight or by making an adjustment with your doctor in terms of the level of the medication you're taking. But there's a number of ways of bringing your blood pressure down to target levels. And then there's, for almost every one of those, an alternative that says don't know. And that's okay, because that's going to be where you go back and say, okay, I don't know what this is. How can I find out? And so what we're trying to do with this is to help people construct their own roadmap to making changes that for them are individualized. We want something that isn't off the rack. It's tailored to their particular body and their particular habits, because that's going to be much more effective than these things that typically we read about online, which are, here's one thing that's going to reduce your risk of dementia by just doing it 3 times a week.
Or you look at 62 wild blueberries from Maine.
Look down through the whole article.
Or 10 almonds. Don't forget the 10 almonds.
Oh, the 10 almonds. Yeah, that was a biggie for a while.
A couple of strawberries is the most recent addition to that. You can have start a restaurant, just have a dementia prevention restaurant, blueberries, strawberries, almonds. There you go. A little chocolate maybe on the side.
And no Benadryl.
No Benadryl. Exactly.
All right. That's interesting. Our listeners are obviously tend to be women over 50. Would you tell them that it's too late to start working to prevent this, or is it too early to start? How soon should we be working on starting to prevent this?
I would love it if you would start at any age, including if we would start with our children by watching what their diets are and how much exercise they get. But the reality is, you got to play it where it lays, just like you're playing golf. You don't get to pick up your ball and put it where you want it. So if you're 15 reading this book or 40 when you're reading this book, great. Go ahead and take a look at all the modifiable risk factors and pick 1 or 2 to start making a change with. When we take a look, for instance, the earlier we begin to make changes that are healthy for us, the better off we are. Needless to say, if we can get somebody's LDL, we can get a woman's LDL down under 70 when she is in her 30s, we know that will significantly reduce her risk of stroke, which is directly tied to dementia, when she's in her 60s and 70s. If you actually wait till you're 60, you're only going to reduce your stroke risk marginally by getting your LDL down to 70 at that point. But if you started when you were 30, you're going to reduce your stroke risk by 40% by the time you get to 65. So the real thing is, anyone who is 50, 60, or 70 years old now and has a child, particularly a daughter who they would like to really protect her cognition, they can share the book, because anything that's good for
share the book, right?
Right. Anything that's good for grandma is good for mom, is good for daughter, is good for granddaughter.
And conversely, while it's never too early to start, I see people in their 80s, occasionally in their 90s, where I give them the same advice, modified a little bit, because I don't want to do drastic kinds of things with people at that point. But exercise is a great example of that, because that's something that many people have either never done or fallen out of the habit of doing. And it still works when you're in your 80s or 90s, just as well as it did when you were younger.
Absolutely. And in fact, there's a section in the book where we actually show you what can be accomplished with somebody's cognition when you put into effect all of these kind of recommendations from the World Health Organization and the Lancet Commission, which is what our recommendations are. This is all evidence-based research. This is not stuff that we've done on our own, although in my practice and in Mitch's practice, we've put it into effect in people who are just like you and me, living in the community. So the reality is, in that sample, we had people who were in their 40s all the way on up to their 90s. Age is one of these things that I like to take advantage of because there are a few things that we can do at 90 that will have a major impact in our lives, but exercise is one of them. Correcting hyperhomocystinemia is another. Correcting all the metabolic factors we possibly can is another. Correcting obstructive sleep apnea is huge. So there are really big things that we can do from 50 years old and up that are going to make a major difference for the rest of our lives.
So I gather the standard recommendations for dementia intervention and treatment are described in the Lancet Commission. What is the Lancet Commission anyway, and what's standard treatment, and how do your recommendations differ? Maybe that's too big of a question. I don't know, but
let's break it down into a couple of points. So the Lancet Commission is basically the United Kingdom put together through Lancet. I don't know. They publish a journal. I don't know if there's a separate organization, but for this particular kind of question, they put together a blue ribbon panel of about 27, 28 different experts. And they looked at all of the preventable or the kinds of conditions that influence dementia to try to figure out what was most likely to influence dementia risk, and also how can you combine them? So,
and which ones are preventable? Their emphasis was preventing dementia.
So this task force published a groundbreaking study back in 2017, where they identified, I think at that point, 11 factors that they determined by using the research and statistical methods would reduce the risk of dementia by 40%. They went back about 3 years later, reviewed the information in between 2017, 2020, added hearing loss, by the way, to talk about that because that's really interesting, to their list, and they upped their percentage to, I think, 42%. 3 years later in the United States, a large study group took their same factors, applied it to an American population through the United States Health and Retirement Survey, and estimated that 60% of dementia could be prevented.
wow.
So when we say 1 out of 2, we're basically splitting the difference between these two very well documented large-scale analyses. We've actually added a couple factors to this that they didn't look at. Perhaps the most important one being the effects of oxygen. People have overlooked the role of sleep apnea, except people working in the field of sleep medicine. One of the reasons why it's so important to take a broad view of this is that each of the disciplines tend to look just at their own literature. So cardiologists look at the heart stuff. Neurologists look at the brain stuff. Sleep medicine people look at sleep. And yet their findings all impact your dementia risk. Our job was to pull it all together, make sense of it, throw away the stuff that looked like it wasn't well substantiated, and then translate it into language that most people are going to understand, throw in some stories, some examples, some anecdotes to make it interesting enough that you want to get through it so it doesn't bore you to death, and try to make it something that would be fun where you say, wow, that's really interesting. And hopefully we've done that. It's with the feedback we've gotten is that we have, but obviously everyone's got a different take on this.
So you mentioned a couple of things there. The homocysteine or whatever it was.
Yes.
You mentioned that a few times. Can you actually tell us what that is? And that is on the checklist.
Yes.
And that was the first question. And I was like, how do I must get a blood test done on this or something.
Yes, you should.
Okay.
Homocysteine, methylmalonic acid, iron to total iron binding ratio, and vitamin D250H are all on that checklist, and they should be looked at. But homocysteine is an amino acid, and amino acids are the building blocks of proteins in our body. So our bodies need homocysteine, but it needs it at just the right level. It can't be too low and it can't be too high. When we know that when it's high, It actually contributes to atherosclerotic coronary vascular disease. And that's when it really first came to medical attention, which was around the mid-90s when they found that men who were having heart attacks in their 40s had very, very high levels of homocysteine. So the cardiologists were the first ones to get a hold of this as a concept that actually affected our heart health. And if you affect your heart health, you're going to affect your brain health. More importantly, when I was doing my research in my last residency, looking at preventable, reversible factors of dementia, I found that homocysteine, when it was high, was a actual cause of dementia. What it is tied to is a low level of folic acid, which is B as in boy, 9. And in the processing of making the energy molecules that all of our cells require in our body called ATP, one of the byproducts of that energy metabolism is homocysteine. If you don't have enough folic acid or you don't have enough usable B12, your body will produce too much homocysteine or it will produce too much methylmalonic acid. And that's why we use those two tests to most sensitively determine if your body's adequate level of B9 and B12 is sufficient for your metabolic needs. When we look at just a B12 level in your blood or just a B9 level or folic acid level in the blood, about half of those lab assays are insensitive. So according to the scale that they give you, what the normal range is, you could be in the normal range, but that could be very inadequate for your particular level of body's needs. So by looking at homocysteine, if that's too high, if methylmalonic acid is too high, then you know you need a special form of folic acid or methylmalonic or a B12 for your brain cells to be working optimally. Long answer, but that's what it was.
Okay. And those numbers are available. Actually, I think they're on the checklist, aren't they?
They're in the checklist.
Yeah. Okay. So we can find our results and look either in the book or on the website and figure out if we're on track.
You can go to braindoc.com, download the PDF of the website, and all those numbers for each one of these lab values that need to be checked will be as part of the Dementia Prevention Checklist.
Okay. The other thing you were talking about is the sleep, which makes sense with oxygen. But is that something, I mean, how many women have sleep apnea and aren't aware of that? And how do you get screened for it? I mean, like, should I just ask to be screened for it, even if I don't really notice any significant problem? Would my doctor screen me for it?
Mitch, why don't you take that one? Because I think it's a great question.
The most recent research, we're talking out in the last couple months, since our book was put to bed, since our book was published, was done at a consortium of large research centers. I don't know if you've heard of the Framingham Heart Study, but this is one of these centers where people from the community go in, they volunteer to be tested on a variety of different measures, and then come back every 3 to 5 years for repeat testing. It really allows us to see how different levels of illness and health will affect our outcome years later. So there are about 7 or 8 of these centers across the country, Mayo clinics in different places, that decided to form a consortium to look at the incidence of sleep apnea in the general population. It's had really never been done before. And so they took 6,000 people and they gave each one of them a one-night home sleep study, which these days is oftentimes the entry point because it's not very expensive. It's easy to do and you don't have to go anywhere. So you just put it on, little device, go to bed.
Put your pajamas on, go to sleep.
Well, yeah. that was the next part.
Yeah.
And then they measure overnight exactly how you're breathing and what your pulse rate is and a variety of different things. Well, the end point here is that 50% of people over age 58 have sleep apnea.
Wow, 50%?
50%. And the numbers get higher the older you get.
And that included women. This was not just specifically men. This was a very good, adequate, more than adequate representation of females in this sampling population. So you, as an average woman who looks to be normal weight for her body size and is otherwise healthy, you may not have what traditionally male doctors have thought of as the body habitus or the requirements for having obstructive sleep apnea. When I was going to medical school in 1993, we were basically taught that the only people who had obstructive sleep apnea were very, very, very overweight, almost Pickwickian, were generally male, had big, thick necks that were oversized 16 or 17 neck size, generally had red, plethoric faces, had high blood pressure, but they were male. And oh, by the way, and you had to snore. Well, lo and behold, we found that menopausal thing that happens to us, it turns a woman who's been estrogen protected until that point in her life, turns those airway muscles into the same ones that a man has. And her rate of having obstructive sleep apnea is equivalent to that of a man.
So most of the people who have sleep apnea have a mild level, but mild means that you only stop breathing 5 to 15 times every hour. It's not insignificant.
Yeah, mild. Wow.
So, and it's very treatable. And especially at that level, it can make a real difference in how your brain's going to work. And the research shows that if you're a woman with mild cognitive impairment, so you're starting to slip already in your thinking and you have sleep apnea, that the sleep treatment, the CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure, that can make a difference, a substantial difference in whether a couple years from then you continue to have very mild problems or you have developed dementia.
The interesting thing is, and I will speak just out of personal experience here and share this. Hopefully your listeners won't mind this, but, I, as a doctor treating patients like this, I was ordering overnight oxygen tests and sleep studies on all my patients and treating hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, including women. Well, finally, I decided, I haven't gone through this test myself. So the person who was working for the DME, who supplies like the sleep studies and the overnight pulse oximeters, brought me an overnight pulse oximeter to wear. A couple of days later, he walks into my office with a CPAP machine underneath his arm and says, "Here you go, Dr. Clionsky. I know you're going to need this because your oxygen level dropped to 69%.
Oh, boy.
Normal level is 94 to 100%. So had I had that happen to me in a hospital, they would have been coding me for respiratory insufficiency. But the reality was I needed to go through a sleep study. I went and I actually took that overnight pulse oximetry study to my own primary care doctor and said, I need a sleep study. Look at this. And he said, oh, you do not. Don't be silly.
Oh, you're kidding.
Because I wasn't a male, obviously. I wasn't overweight. I didn't snore. I didn't have high blood pressure. My cholesterol was perfect. I wasn't diabetic. I had no problems. So sure enough, I got the sleep study. And guess what? At the age of 62, I went on CPAP. And lo and behold, I wasn't feeling like I had to take a nap at 3:00 in the afternoon anymore. I wasn't forgetting 3 of the 6 things I needed at the grocery store. I wasn't getting into tiffs with Mitch a week later after he and I discussed something, and I would swear he never told me something because my brain was like, it would go in one ear and right out the other. So I was developing the equivalent of mild cognitive impairment. And when my obstructive sleep apnea was definitively fixed, about 6 months after that, I had the brain back that I did when I went through my last residency in my 50s.
Boy, that's encouraging news, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So how did you convince your doctor to give you the test when he said you didn't need it?
I said, yes, I do. And if you don't order it, I'll either get somebody else to order it or I will order it. Now, not everybody has that luxury of being a doctor and saying, I'm going to order it myself. So what I'm suggesting is we, particularly as women, need to be very assertive getting these tests ordered by our doctors, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants.
You can take it to the bank, though, that this study, which was published, I believe, 2023 study that was published in JAMA Neurology, showed a 50% incidence. So that you could say, look, I don't like my chances here.
Yeah.
It's a coin toss.
Right.
What does it cost? I mean, because if you were to buy one of these home sleep studies retail through a site on one of the
buy one or buy a home sleep study?
Yeah, you can get them for about $225. So we know that it's not expensive to the health system, because if it's retail at that price, you know that the insurance companies are not reimbursing at that rate. So this is not something that's going to bankrupt American medicine. And you say to your doctor, start looking for the kinds of things. If you snore, that's one symptom. If you get up repeatedly to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, guess what? That's not your bladder. That's probably sleep apnea. It's actually related to why the urine keeps building up, even though you haven't anything to drink when you went back to bed. If you wake up feeling like you need to pound a couple of espressos in the morning to get going, that's likely a cause for this.
Particularly if you have a headache in the morning.
I was going to say, if you sleep in, especially, you wake up with a headache in the back of your head, very likely.
Or anywhere in your head.
If you fall asleep when you don't intend to. So you're sitting there watching TV and you say, I'm just resting my eyes. And your spouse is saying, nah, you really were asleep.
Or reading a book or driving, or if you're a passenger in a car, or worse yet, as you're driving a car, this particular condition is responsible for over 100,000 motor vehicle accidents on a yearly basis. Because one of the things that happens to us is during the day, one of the reasons why we appear to be forgetful and have lost our ability to multitask and pay attention to what's going on in the world around us, if we have this condition, is that during the day, our brains take little micro naps. Literally, with our eyes open, we are taking 500 to 700 millisecond naps when our brain is completely in sleep. Our eyes are open. And what happens when you're driving a car? That car is moving at anywhere from 35 to 70 miles an hour.
And you're asleep.
And you are asleep.
So even if you don't want to prevent dementia, preventing an accident is even more urgent.
Well, there are some people who aren't going to be able to prevent dementia, but is there a way to delay it?
All the things that we've been talking about actually delay it, as well as contribute to the prevention of it. So instead of the trajectory being so steep, or you're developing it 5 or 10 years sooner than you would have, you're actually having a slower rate of cognitive decline due to natural aging, and you're postponing dementia. Yes.
And then if you combine it with the medications that we have had out since the mid-1990s, we've had 4 medicines that have been approved by the FDA, been on the market for about 25 years, each of which is effective at slowing down the rate of decline. And when combined, there's 2 classes of those medicines that are split into 2 groups. When you combine those, we do an even better job of reducing the rate of decline. So when I have patients come in, they say, oh, my sister has dementia. And I said to them, well, are they getting treated for that? And they'll say, what do you mean? And I said, well, are they on these medications? And they say, no. I say, why not? And they go back and check. And chances are they have a doctor who says, well, those medicines are only marginally effective. And I tell them that that's not true. They're marginally effective at making their memory better. They're very good at preventing it from getting worse. So if you have the right expectation for these and you combine them with these dementia prevention strategies, we see people 5 years from when they first walked in that with the proper treatment are basically the same, which is amazing for a declining progressive condition.
When do we discuss any cognitive concerns we have with our doctor? And what kind of testing would they do? And then I was going to also ask about medication, but when do we decide, okay, it's time to actually say to my doctor, I don't think my brain's working so hot?
When you're starting to feel that way is a good time to start talking about it. You're likely to find your doctor being a little skeptical because they have this image that you have to be older than you are to really have problems. And your problems also need to be worse than your doctor's. That's the problem. I do that too.
And doctors are in just as much denial as everybody else is.
Ideally, you would take a brief cognitive test every year, every couple years as part of an annual wellness exam. And that would start with a baseline. Perhaps ideally also, you might be able to take something at home that you could take into your doctor and say, I didn't do as well as I had hoped on this, and this concerns me, and get the doctor's attention. But we're really working on that problem. We're very adamant about trying to change the landscape from the doctor's perspective, because if we can convince doctors to know more about this, to pay attention to it earlier, we're going to have a much better effect on the general health of America, rather than hoping that one by one, people are going to read our book and take action as a result. I mean, obviously, it has to happen from both sides. But if we can get this information in the hands of physicians, especially during their training, when they're more developing their sense of how they're going to approach problems and they're more open to new ideas, that could make a difference. But we have to pay attention to it.
If a person went to their physician and talked about it, would they then refer us to someone like you, Mitch, and have you do the testing, or do they just do some sort of testing in the office and say, oh, yeah, you've got dementia?
Hopefully it would be a two-step process that they would use the in-office test as a screening. And then, unless you did really well, to send you off to someone like me, a neuropsychologist who could do more extensive testing to really nail it down. They'll also order some of the blood tests and maybe an MRI of the brain, because they want to make sure that we've covered all the bases. This is one of these things where getting all of the information is really helpful. When people try to nickel and dime and do a little bit here and a little bit there, they oftentimes don't deliver the best care.
Well, we also know, speaking of doctors, is that according to the most recent poll and survey that was conducted by the Alzheimer's Association and published in their Facts and Figures 2020 edition, is that about 50 to 60% of even recently trained doctors, who are the primary care doctors, the general practitioners, family practitioners, and internists, do not feel comfortable with diagnosing and treating dementia. And we see it because so many patients are coming in to see us years after they first started to have symptoms. So this is, again, a place where you have to be assertive and represent to your doctor that you are very committed about this. And if they don't want to order these tests, then they need to get you to somebody who will.
And then once you've been diagnosed, you're saying that so I've always heard that the medications don't work all that well, but you're saying...
right, I've heard that too. Right.
But you're saying if you think about them, that the point is to prevent or to slow down further decline. They are effective. They're just not going to make you better.
The research has unequivocally established that it slows the rate of decline. So if I can keep somebody out of a nursing home for a couple of more years, to me, that is a huge success. Keep somebody living at home instead of landing up someplace else.
Let's shift gears a little bit. What about food? Are there certain foods, not eating, that really makes a difference?
Here we are back to those 61 blueberries from Maine again.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've heard people talk about alcohol or processed foods or, too much sugar. Is there any valid reason to avoid certain foods?
Well, alcohol is a separate class than foods in our view.
It's a real chemical. It's a real toxin.
And there's good questions to be asked about that. And we could talk about that. From a food perspective, the real net result of the research most recently published is that Mediterranean diets, so low in processed foods, low in meats, red meats, high in fish and chicken and legumes and vegetables, is better than a bad diet. So if you take the top 5% or 10% and contrast it with the bottom 5 to 10% of diets, clearly the Mediterranean diet is better. When you factor in all the 80% in the middle, it's not really any better, however. But people persist in that. In fact, some of the best-selling books on Alzheimer's disease and dementia are books about avoiding grain or books about avoiding processed foods. And there's people who will, go down with the flag because that's what they believe. And they'll tell you, this is what I eat, and that's what I'm doing to protect myself. And, it's great that they're interested in doing that, but it's not really going to do what you need to do. It will contribute. Certainly having a better diet is better than eating fast food through the drive-in. No doubt about that.
And if you're carrying more weight on your body frame than what is good for your brain health, then certainly it's the equation is what kind of calories am I putting in and what kind of calories am I wearing off? So that really takes us to the point of how critical exercise is for us. And exercise, if there was one thing that everybody was going to do short of not smoking cigarettes anymore, I mean, that's just, if you're smoking today, boy, we need to get you to stop. But if there's one thing that we could get everybody to do is start exercising as early in life as possible, but right up into the age of 90, if you've never exercised before, that's the one thing that we would advocate.
Any particular kind of exercise? Like cardio, strength, whatever. What do you recommend?
We like walking. And the reason we like walking is that it's available. You don't need special equipment. You don't need to be in great shape to do it. It doesn't require much in the way of, particular clothing or gym membership. The big problem with exercise for most people is not that they can't do it, it's that they don't do it. And so we're trying to avoid the barriers. So our formula for this, and walking is something that people can, you can do other kinds of cardio exercises. You like to swim? Great. You want to ride a bicycle? Wonderful. You want to go on a treadmill, you want a rowing machine, wonderful. But that's not who I'm talking to. I'm talking to the people who have a real big butt, not the butt they're sitting on. I'm going to clarify this. I saw your expression. Not that butt. They have that butt too. What I want them to examine is the butt in the sentence. I would exercise butt. What follows that is what we're trying to get them to examine and to change. And the way that we propose that people do this. So if someone comes in and says, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't like the exercise. It's boring. That's my butt. It's boring. I don't like it because of whatever.
It makes me sweat, whatever.
I say to them, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a 10-minute walk. Can you do that? They said, well, yeah. So I want you to do it 3 times a day because it's additive. Now, if you can do it at a brisk pace, which means that you're walking fast enough that your heart rate goes up, but not so fast that you can't talk to someone. That's brisk. If you do 30 minutes a day, broken into 10-minute stretches, call it interval training if you like, that adds up to 210 minutes a week, which is right in the sweet spot in the 150 to 300 minutes that all the medical associations are advocating. It also will give you somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 10 miles a week of exercise. Wow. That's really impressive for somebody who's spending most of their time on the couch. But it's doable because it's only 10 minutes. And so it's not too hot. It's not too cold. You're not going to melt if it's raining. Obviously, if it's in the middle of a tornado, please don't go out. If it's freezing and there's ice, stay at home, go do something else instead, walk in the mall, go to the big box store, go shopping at the grocery store. But that's the target. It's really hard for people to talk themselves out of this. And that's what we're looking for, how to get around their butt.
Walking and ideally briskly, but if you, for some reason, can't do the briskly, it sounds like even just walking.
Yes. Get moving.
Yep. And if you can't do 10 minutes, do 5 minutes.
I absolutely hate exercise. I'm one of those people. First of all, I'm naturally lazy. I like being lazy. I hate sweating. And I will tell you, particularly just before COVID hit, my weight was getting out of control. And I just really didn't like the way my clothes were fitting. And so I'd been listening to my husband say this for years, do 10 minutes at a time, do 10 minutes at a time. Well, I had this reclining stationary bike and I started with 10 minutes a day and I thought I was going to die at the end of 10 minutes. I didn't think I was going to survive it. Well, you're now looking at somebody who can do 90 minutes every single day.
Wow.
It enabled me to eat a reasonable diet with the foods I love and still fit in my, size 6 clothing, which is what I wanted. That was my goal. I also don't have to take blood pressure medicine. And when my cholesterol had been getting high, now I don't have to take cholesterol medicine either. That 10 minutes a day, 3 times a day, building it up, you'll build up your endurance and it will begin to kick in those natural happy hormones that our brains make all on their own when we exercise.
Which, by the way, I've never experienced. People tell me about it. I do it because I know it's good for me. But man, I keep waiting for those endorphins to happen.
Well, mine have happened.
Good. That's a blessing. That's a blessing.
I know. People talk about that and sometimes boy.
You feel like you're cheated, huh?
Yeah. What's the point of this? Well, it sounds in some ways that the exercise that you do for your heart is also exercise that you could do, that you are doing for your brain.
Perfect.
And for your legs. So let's talk about falls risk. As we get older, we begin to have more difficulty with balance, but also because of osteoporosis, which also sets in after your hormones are changed.
Wear and tear on our cartilage, on our joints. These are all increased risk factors for falling, not to mention the changes that we get in our vestibular ocular system that controls our balance. And we know that we begin to sway more or lose our balance more easily once we turn 40. So these are age-related changes. So if you're exercising and walking,
you're going to strengthen your lower body, build up muscles so that those off-balance moments won't turn into falls. Because for so many people, especially over the age of about 70, if you fall, you break. If you break, you end up in the hospital. And sometimes you don't pass go and collect $200. You go directly to the nursing home.
That's right.
So that's really what we're looking at. Or you hit your head and then you have a bleed inside your brain. And then you really do end up in surgery or the nursing home. So there's all kinds of reasons why that kind of exercise is good for your heart and your brain and your bones as well.
Yeah, falls are a big deal. In your book, you mentioned more than 20 factors that impact dementia risk, including 15 that are changeable in adulthood. And we just talked about sleep and food and exercise. Are there others that we haven't touched on? Can you tell us what some of the other changeable factors are?
Well, let's talk about alcohol.
Oh, yeah, we didn't talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is this the fall risk too?
Is this where we become unpopular?
Sort of. I mean, everybody agrees that drinking too much is bad for us. We define that by
at any age.
At any age. So really having more than 3 drinks for people in middle age or older is really a significant risk. And by drinks, I just did something on a LinkedIn where I took a glass of wine and took a picture of the glass of wine. It looks like a standard glass of wine. Well, it turns out that it's actually 3 glasses of wine in one. The glasses have gotten bigger, sort of like the plates have gotten bigger in restaurants. Well, the glasses have also gotten bigger. In restaurants, though, they typically will pour it at about 4 ounces for a wine, which is a normal serving. But the picture shows 12 ounces. It looks like a fairly normal at-home kind of glass of wine. So when people come in, I say, well, how often do you drink? What do you drink? How much do you drink? Because they always want to be real vague with me about this. I will then say, how do you pour it? And whether it's whiskey in a tumbler or beer is usually a little more standard, but wine comes in large bottles. They oftentimes don't measure to any degree and don't really have a good sense. They just sort of fill up the glass and add ice. If they're drinking, hard liquor, or they fill up the glass if it's a wine glass, and they count that as 1. Let's say I have 2 of those. And when we really nail it down, they're actually having 4 to 6. So that's too much. The early research suggested that it was better to have a drink if you're a woman, or up to 2 drinks if you're a man per night. And that it was better than having none. That's been challenged. And so we don't encourage people to start drinking if they already don't. We also encourage them not to have more than 2 drinks a night, just as a general rule.
I'm an evidence-based doctor. I did everything with those patients that you actually see in the early part of the book based on the evidence that was available. There is no randomized controlled trial study out there today that says alcohol is not harmful to people. We know it is. We know it's a toxin. It kills cardiac cells. It kills brain cells. So the reality is if somebody is beginning to feel like their memory's a little shaky or they can't quite handle as many things going on around them the same way they used to, or they're forgetting to do stuff that they wanted to do, by all means, alcohol is one of those things that can be taken away and only produce a benefit for you. It's not going to harm you to not drink alcohol.
Unless you drink a lot of alcohol every day, in which case don't do it without your doctor's involvement.
If you're actually drinking 2 to 3 drinks a day, you may seriously want to talk to whoever your primary care practitioner is and say, how do I take, less of this in a safe way?
So it's sort of a qualified, we're not telling people don't drink at all. I'm someone who enjoys a drink. But I think it's really important, if you're having a question about this, to do the experiment. Try not drinking for a month. See how you feel. See how you sleep. See what your thinking is like. You may discover that you want to reset yourself a little bit to going back to drinking less the following month, or maybe not drinking except on special occasions.
And, Chris, you said something really, really important just a couple of minutes ago, which it sounds like what we were advocating with respect to exercise is good for your heart. And whatever you do for your heart, that's also great for your brain. And nothing could be truer than in staying away from alcohol. If somebody has high blood pressure, for instance, and they even just drink 4 to 6 ounce dose of wine a day, the fastest way to drop your blood pressure and get off of blood pressure control medicine is to not drink alcohol. Because what happens when we drink is we ingest that alcohol, and temporarily it does lower our blood pressure right then and there, acutely. But over time, what happens is the rebound effect is it raises our blood pressure above what had been the baseline. And when you stop drinking alcohol, that's beautiful for your heart, but it's great for your brain.
That is a tough one for some people I know, because alcohol is really, just like with food, I guess, it's just such a ingrained part of much of our society.
Right. And it's everywhere.
Yeah, we're not really advocating teetotaling. I don't want people to say, well, I can't do that, so I won't do anything else. We're saying we want to empower people to see where they are and to make reasonable choices based on their needs and their risks. I think that all of us do some things which ideally we probably wouldn't do, but sometimes we want to do it anyway. For most of the people that we see who are really at risk, that's not the issue. They're the ones who are habitually drinking more than they should. They're the ones who are habitually eating more than their bodies are built for, who are not paying attention to these things. So that's why you want to sort of decide where your strengths and weaknesses are and plot something that you can do and stick with that's going to make a difference down the line.
If there are more than 20 factors and there's 15 that are changeable, that means there's 5 that are apparently out of our control.
I never got to pick my parents.
Right, neither did I. Well, so what are those 5 things, or roughly?
You're a Debbie Downer, you know that.
I know, sorry.
Genes, those darn gene things.
It's genes, it's early life trauma, it's prenatal deprivations. If your mom smoked, while she was pregnant with you, you're not going to change that. If you decided to jump into the shallow end of the swimming pool at age 6 and hit your head on the bottom, guess what? You're not going to fix that at this point. If you dropped out of school, you may be able to go back and get additional education. We do know that education is protective, but for most people that are reading this book in their 50s, that part of it may have passed them by in terms of most of its neuroprotective abilities. So rather than focus on those, because we really can't do much, we keep saying, okay, what can we do now? What can we do that's going to make a difference in the future?
Okay, so that would also include things like brain injury, concussions or whatever as a teenager.
Yes, if it was up to me today, and well, it has been up to me. I have advocated that my grandchildren do not play football. I don't want them playing football, and I don't want them playing soccer.
You're talking to Ohioans here. That's blasphemy, Emily.
I know.
Well, definitely wear a helmet when you're bike riding.
Yes, wear a helmet when you're bike riding.
And think about not having your kids go on the bumping cars at the fair. When you think about my kids...
Well, those bumper cars, those were like the best.
I know, but you're inducing whiplash injuries in kids repeatedly. And my kids would say, I want to go on. I said, look, I see a lot of concussions. The number one thing that's happening to most of these people in auto accidents is a whiplash. It's not so much with a seatbelt that they're hitting their heads, is that their brain is getting jostled back and forth. Why would I want you to do this, even if it's just once or twice a year? I just don't see the value in it.
Trampolines, forget kids going up and down on trampolines. They've done the studies. This is dangerous to young developing brains.
So we're no fun. Forget about that return engagement, Emily.
So, are there any supplements that you would recommend? Or you mentioned medications. Again, what are those 4 medications? Are they easy to remember, or it's something that?
No, because you wouldn't be taking them if you could.
Yeah, those are medications that after you've had an evaluation and it's determined that you're actually either in mild cognitive impairment or in the earlier stages of dementia, that you should be, your doctor and you should talk about going on Namenda, which is memantine, or one of the cholinergic drugs such as Aricept or Exelon, and those will help your memory sparing process.
So are there any supplements that just to be like a healthier person that you suggest to people, or any medication? I assume if we have to control blood pressure, you take those kinds of.
Yeah. If you got bad cholesterol, take your blood pressure, take your cholesterol control medicine. If you're diabetic, get your hemoglobin A1C under 5.7 and keep it as low as possible. Get the blood pressure as low as your doctor recommends it being. I like my patients' blood pressure very, very low unless they are in their 80s or 90s, in which case I'll tolerate it being a little bit higher. But the reality is all those magic bullets that you're seeing advertised on television, on the radio, dare I say its name?
The ones with the jellyfish?
The ones with the jellyfish, yeah. Forget taking the supplement that's based on jellyfish, or the one that says you can condense all the vegetables and fruits you need into 6 little capsules a day. And boy, this is going to make you better for life. Yeah. There is no evidence whatsoever that this delays dementia or really significantly impacts cognition in a measurable way that will affect your life. And if you want to spend that money and you feel like it's burning a hole in your pocket, feel free to send it to me. I can donate it to a charity.
Okay. In our bio, an introduction of you, Mitch, was that one of the things was also ADHD. Is there any correlation between ADHD and dementia?
Actually, there is some research that does suggest that people with ADHD who are untreated for the ADHD may have higher rates of dementia as they get older. Part of that may be also due to the fact that people with ADHD are more likely to drop out of school.
And are more likely to have obstructive sleep apnea.
Are they?
Yes, they are.
Very high overlap between ADHD and sleep
About
apnea.
1/3 of them.
Okay. And women are also tend to be underdiagnosed with ADHD, which.
Absolutely.
Okay. Interesting.
And you know what, especially if we're really, really bright when we're young, even if we have ADD, we still have so many compensatory ways of getting around stuff and getting knowledge into our heads. And women particularly have been socialized to be more controlled and better behaved, yada, yada, all that kind of stuff. So the reality is what happens when we hit that estrogen deficit in the perimenopause and our brains begin that normal aging process, we lose some of that cognitive reserve that we had when we were in our teens and our 20s and our 30s. And that's when that ADD now really reaches the peak. And we're sitting here saying, oh my God, I've got mild cognitive impairment. It all ties together.
It does, doesn't it?
Now that I've been a Debbie Downer, can you give us is there like an optimistic way of thinking about this? Is there something, can you cheer us up?
Absolutely. If you figure out what your profile looks like in terms of your strengths and weaknesses, and it's something that doesn't cost you a cent to do, because you can get this free at braindoc.com, you're then in a position to decide where you're on target or where you're near target or where you're off target. And by then making changes where you're not on target and continuing with the ones where you are on target, you're going to do a good job of reducing the chances of developing dementia as you age. So it's a very active approach that we are recommending. There's a tag phrase that we use, which is don't be a dementia worrier, become a prevention warrior.
I like that.
And we really believe that. There are things that everyone can do. Sometimes it will not pay off. You'll lose cognitive functioning anyway. It's, again,
But it's better that you will have done these kinds of things, because at least you will have taken your own life into your own hands and your own control as much as you possibly can. And that's really what we want to preserve as we go through life. We want to become more of ourselves, and we want to stay that way as long as we possibly can and be in control of our own fate.
As long as possible. Right.
And that's true with all kind of things in health is, you can take as good a care of yourself as you possibly can, but that doesn't mean bad things don't still happen.
Right.
But maybe fewer bad things if you're taking good care of yourself, right?
Right. That's exactly it. The best you can hope for is that you've done the best you can, and hopefully it's enough.
That's exactly right. Very well put.
Well, if our listeners wanted to follow you online, do you have social media accounts? Like, are you on different, I know braindoc.com is your website, but how about your social media?
So we do have some social media accounts. Most of them are under the handle or name of 2 Brain Docs. So the number 2, BRAINDOCS. I'm on LinkedIn just under my name, Mitchell Clionsky, fairly regularly in posting ideas and articles about a variety of things related to brain health. So I'd love to have people follow me on LinkedIn, because I think that it's actually a longer forum. I'm really not into doing 30-second reels. Doesn't lend itself to here I am dancing for dementia prevention.
Well, it's a more complex subject. It's not something that lends itself to the 30-second hit. Right.
Exactly.
And I'm not on, we have a Twitter account, but frankly, I don't go on that very much.
LinkedIn is probably the best place.
LinkedIn. All right. Very good.
And the website, which is also where people can find the checklist, is
BrainDoc, singular, BRAINDOC,
braindoc.com.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that we have links in our show notes so that people can find the checklist and find your website and your LinkedIn and all that just very easily. So.
And your book. Let's remind everyone.
The book.
The title of your book is
Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. Johns Hopkins Press. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble online. It's available through the publisher. It's also downloadable on Kindle and on your iPad. And you can listen to it because it's also an audiobook.
Oh, interesting.
Nice.
Which is really nice because it's actually the actor that we have doing this, a woman named Nan McNamara, is incredibly interesting to listen to. So I also advocate people, if they want to take a walk, what better than to listen to the stuff on dementia prevention?
Perfect on the treadmill so that you don't get bored. You can listen to this. It's
absolutely,
especially when it's all snowy outside. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a very enlightening conversation. I actually feel like you did bring us some hope and good thoughts.
Yeah, it's great.
Wonderful. There's a lot of hope here, actually. This is the future.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Well, and it's an important issue to know about, at any age you can start making changes now that will affect you for the rest of your life.
You're absolutely right. Thank you so much for having us today. It's been delightful to be with you and your audience.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks again. We'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Dementia is one of those subjects that nobody really wants to talk about. I looked at that checklist on braindoc.com before we talked with Emily and Mitch, but I think I need to actually go take it now. I feel like it's better to know where I am than just hoping for the best.
Yeah, that's very true. I think out of all of that, I was really surprised about what they said about sleep apnea.
Yeah, I was shocked. 50% of women over 50.
And you don't have to snore. I thought that was part of it.
And you don't have to be overweight.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening. I don't know. I was very surprised about that.
Yes, I think I may ask my doctor for a sleep test.
Yeah.
I was also surprised that food doesn't seem to really play a large part in this, except for being a healthy weight and maybe following the Mediterranean diet. I think you had to eat healthy foods, but it didn't seem to matter what they were.
Yeah, when I asked that question, I was a little embarrassed because it didn't matter. And so often what we talk about is good nutrition, but I think that affects other crucial things more, like crucial things like your heart, your blood sugar, and those type of things, and that affects your brain. So it's secondary causation.
And I think they were really reacting to we see these headlines all the time. Eat blueberries to avoid whatever you're avoiding.
There's no silver bullet, one thing. It's a whole combination of things.
Yes. Which maybe is, I think, what they were responding to, because I don't think they were saying you should go out and eat
no
junk or fast food or whatever.
Well, you mentioned a little bit about that checklist on braindoc.com, and I think beyond the sleep apnea, next time I go to the doctor, I'm going to ask for a test about the methyl malaconic acid and the homocysteine. I'm not saying those right, but they're all listed, the first two questions on that checklist, which threw me for a loop at the beginning because I've never even heard of those things before. So,
well, I had sort of heard of them, so I'm going to go back and how we can see our old test results online now, usually through portals. I'm going to go check and see if I actually have ever had those.
Right. And maybe they use initials, and that's why I don't recognize it.
Yes. But if not, I will certainly ask a doctor to check those levels.
Test those, test the sleep. I mean, that's when they said it over 50%, I'm going back to the sleep apnea. But wow, that's 50-50. There were a couple things in there and things that we can prevent. I mean, they had some really great little catchphrases. I think they said something like, don't be a dementia worrier, be a prevention warrior.
I think that's good. Yes.
That's how I have to think of this, because it just kind of gave me the creeps thinking about how this can get into your mind, thinking about worrying about it. And that's not their intention at all. They want to make people realize so much of it is preventable.
Yes. And, Mitch brought up something, and I meant to go back to it, and was hearing loss could help lead to dementia.
Sure.
Because he said that was a relatively new discovery, I guess.
Well, that makes sense, because so much of your interaction with people and thoughts and listening to a book, things like that.
So I actually had my hearing checked recently, and it was good. But I'd had an issue where my ears were blocked up. And what I realized is when you're having difficulties hearing, it's challenging because people don't like having to repeat themselves. They get impatient. And it was an eye-opening experience to be going around not really hearing well.
I added an app to my phone that was for how loud different things are. And it also measures how loudly I listen on my headphones, which I thought is interesting because I like to have headphones on when I'm, exercising or walking, doing that kind of stuff. And sometimes it's loud around me. So you just keep turning the headphones up, and that's not, that leads to hearing loss. So it is interesting. Something else to get checked.
Yeah.
Prevention's good.
Yes, it is. And these are all things that are easy enough to check on. And many of them are things that if you're going to do anyway for the rest of your body's health.
Exactly. So, hey, if you're listening, let us know what you thought about today's episode. Was there anything that especially resonated with you? Leave us a message at becomingellie.com, or you can find us as Becoming Ellie on Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, and LinkedIn.
We're always asking you to tell a friend or rate us, but if you like the podcast, then, you can just subscribe to it. That's a great way to support us.
That's right. Or leave a rating, which we love too. That helps other people find us.
Yeah, that's true.
It was great talking with you today, Jill. I'm looking forward to our next episode of the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast.
I am too. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.